Welcome to Wabash Center's Dialogue on Teaching. It's a good day for a thought-provoking conversation, especially with friends. I am Nancy Lynn Westfield, director of the Wabash Center. At the producer's desk is Rachel Mills, and of course, Paul Myrie is our sound engineer. My guest today is Dr. Barbara A. Holmes. Dr. Holmes is a faculty member with the Center for Action and Contemplation in the Living School. She is President Emerita at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. Welcome, Barbara, to the conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
It's so good to be here with you, Lynn.
So we want to discuss, I think your book is exciting, right? I have been carrying the book around for weeks. You know how you get one of those books and you just kind of carry it around with you? That's what I've been doing for weeks. So Crisis Contemplation, Healing the Wounded Village is your latest book. It is, of course, in dialogue with, the title's escaping me, Unspeakable Joy. It's in conversation with that previous text. So if we bounce back and forth, that makes sense to me, but we're here to talk about crisis contemplation. Why is crisis and contemplation on your mind?
Because I'm alive during an era where both interplay every time I open my eyes and at night when I go to sleep. I'm aware of all those who are in crisis, even if I'm not at the moment. I'm aware of the villages that are under siege. I'm aware that skin color, ethnicity, all of those isms have risen to such an extent that all of us, even if we don't fit into one of those categories, is in crisis.
And the contemplation part, which I love, right?
Oh, yeah, for me, I've always been a mini tornado. Aspiring to be a much bigger one. They tell me that my Orisha is Oya, who is the woman of the seas and storms. And I've always approached life that way, that there wasn't a lot of time. I wanted to get a lot done. And I hurled myself into the fray. And it was only after serving as president of United and joining the faculty at the Center for Action and Contemplation that I began to realize how debilitating it is to live in the midst of a storm all the time. Even if the storm is swirling all around you and you really cannot control the elements, there is a way that you can be still in the midst of the storm. Now, I knew that. My parents knew that. My grandmama knew that. And they tried to teach it to me, but I was whirling so fast, I don't think I heard most of it. And watching Father Richard Rohr sit into silence and require that before anything gets done, we do nothing. Sometimes with music, sometimes with a recitation of scripture, sometimes with the ringing of a bell, we just settle. And everything after that is so much easier.
Mm-hmm. So that settling, that playing of music, that acknowledgement that there's crisis all around us without having to be crisis inside of us, chaos inside of us, is an acknowledgement and a tapping into the mysticism of our traditions, right? So many, we have been trained not to bring our mystical traditions into our own classrooms, not to bring our spiritual practices, even the benefits of them, into our classrooms. We have been trained to silo and isolate and fragment ourselves. This book, and you are calling for something other than that during this contemporary crisis. Talk about your frame of mysticism and teaching.
Well, I've been teaching for a long time, Lynn, and most of the time it's been transmission of what somebody else taught me. And my writing has been different because there's always been a deeply poetic strain to it. There were things I could not say unless I said it poetically. But it's only recently in retirement where I feel free to teach the experiential wisdom of the elders, to teach what I don't know but what I've glimpsed, to teach mystical possibilities. So what I'm doing now, I'm not teaching toward definitive answers, just explorations of what's possible. Because I mean, the truth of the matter is we live in the midst of a mystery. The world that we come into is mysterious. And, you know, I'm an old Gullah woman on my father's side. And so I watched my aunties negotiate those places in the hinterlands between life and death and all the places in between. It didn't seem odd. It didn't seem crazy. It seemed like truth. And so by the time I started school, they couldn't tell me that there weren't worlds other than the one we were walking around in. They couldn't tell me that. I knew it. So
you say you came to this through retirement, right? Bringing the courage to bring this in retirement. But so retirement just gave you time and space. So do we need time and space to get to the freedom that you are modeling for us?
it's not so much time and space as my own willingness to allow myself to teach what I know. When I am constrained by a particular job, it's job responsibilities. As president, I'm also, a fundraiser. So the question then becomes, how much can I reveal that doesn't fall within the parameters of what people expect and know? Because after all, we've created stories about how the world is. I know that's not how the world is. But if I'm fundraising, am I able to say, well, that's not exactly true? Am I able to say, oh, I had a different experience? My auntie who passed 2 years ago came and told me I'm not able to do any of that. Mm-hmm. Now, not beholden for the well-being of an institution or anybody other than the gift that God's given me, I feel compelled to say what I know.
Help us teach better, Barbara. This is a moment when it feels like even the urgency has quickened. And yet we're without vision in the academy. We're without the ability to, we yearn for new directions. We don't have a vision for those new directions. And in many cases, your book starts to introduce us to a new way to think about our teaching.
I think that I came to that by the last chapter, where I realized that we wouldn't reach what we need to reach through ordinary routes. That there is a leap, a transcendent leap from where we are to where we want to be. Right now, we're educating children to conform. You don't get Einsteins and can do cancer treatments from children who are taught to line up, raise their hands before they speak, all of this. And we've lessened it to some extent, but the very format of our educational process is designed to crush any possible gift or imagination in a newborn soul. So how do you get from where we are to where we want to be? First of all, we have to be authentic selves. And I'm not sure I always was. I was taught to succeed. That's not the same thing as being an authentic self. Sometimes succeeding requires that you be absolutely inauthentic. So what I'm urging is for people to find creative and peaceful ways, diversions around purportedly settled knowledge. I give an example that may not really fit, but I mean, we all know that the banks are marauding titans that control people's lives. Okay, fine. We don't have to start a war, get into the streets, protest the banks. You can stop taking mortgages, build tiny houses, and circumvent that system. You can decide to live a different way. People are actually doing that right now. The pandemic taught them that they don't have to work for $7 or $8 an hour pushing hamburgers, that they really could have an entrepreneurial spirit, that God would take care of them, even if they didn't get up every morning at 6 and never see their children. And so some political entities are saying, oh, well, they got so much money during the pandemic, they don't want to work. No, they got free.
Yeah.
You stop
Yeah.
paying them, and they survived.
Talk about a different narrative, right? Talk about a different spin.
Yeah, yeah.
So help us be free in our classrooms, and in the most practical senses. Like if we want to be free, because I genuinely believe that we do, that our colleagues do. I also genuinely believe that we don't know how. Right. So if I'm designing a syllabus, if I'm tasked with teaching another class, if I'm in these classrooms with people who don't look like me, right? I don't know what to do. And I'm afraid, because fear is paralyzing. I am afraid I will do the wrong thing. So rather than risking doing the wrong thing, I'm going to stay with the status quo.
Well, I think I had a slight advantage, and the way that I approached it may not be the way for others. But I've never been afraid to take a risk, because I knew from scripture that I would never be left alone, that God would not see me on the street looking for food. That wasn't going to happen. So once I had that peace, plus my aunties telling me there were people in another realm watching over me, who knew what was going on, who would warn me, who would come to me in dreams. I now had a network beyond what I could see, beyond what I actually could prove. I was going to be all right. So how that manifested for me was, when I did interviews, I was brutally honest about who I was. I didn't try to get a job, because I figured, well, if I don't get this one, I'll get another one. All will be well. The ancestors are watching. And so I would say, well, why would you do something like that instead of this? Why? That doesn't make sense. I wouldn't, I think. And I was just very open, and you could take it or leave it. Some people happily left it. Others, they said, we don't want this. We don't want our apples. Our apples rolling all down the road with this.
And it wasn't personal, right? You can't take it personally. It's not.
I didn't. But I said, if I lie in the beginning about who I am and what I am, then I cannot complain about the consequences of that. And the other way was to find what message it was that Spirit wanted me to share through my teaching. And that's different for everyone. So the way I did it was, there were certain classes that had to be taught. In every class that I taught, as I'm creating my syllabus, I looked for the risky edges in that. So, I can teach the history of African religions, and then I can make that as boring as possible, or I can take it to Vodun, Loa. I can connect it into the mystical traditions of Native Americans and African Americans. I mean, no one's leaning over our shoulder as we create these syllabi. You have to stay within certain parameters, yes. Certain things must be taught. But there are ways to inject risk. There are ways to ignite a student's excitement by asking them about the risks they have or have not taken, and the things they've seen that they're not allowed to talk about. If you walk into a classroom and say, I've seen things that I can't prove, have you? When was the last time one of your elders came to you in a dream? No professor's going to say that to them. And I say right up front, this isn't going to help you get a church. And in fact, I advise you not to mention this in your committee on ministry.
But a lot of students are yearning for that conversation. Yeah. Even if the committee on ministry is not yearning for it, a lot of students are yearning for that conversation.
Right. And they have to, part of the discernment process is, are you called to be inside the church, making change from within? then there's a certain path you've got to take to get in.
Mhm.
If you're called to be outside of the church, then know that. And be as bold and brazen as you can as you seek the Spirit's guidance into the power of what you're going to be, teaching the church from outside of its rules. I knew I couldn't stay within a denomination. I wasn't going to do anything they told me to do. No, would I go in there then?
Well, I also hear you saying that courage, like so many things, are spiritual disciplines. And you
Yes.
just don't jump into the deep end of the pool and hope for the best, right? That you have to practice, you have to take baby steps, you have to have, you have to teach yourself to be courageous. Nobody can get their fears to surrender in the first go round. So we have to do small things to be courageous so we can get to the big things.
That's right. And you have to realize that if you want to eat sardines, you can chew on that can all you want. It's going to take a while. It would be better to pull the lid.
I know that's right. So you have written this book, all of your books, particularly this book, Crisis Contemplation, in poetry and prose. And dare to call it an intellectual book, an academic book. Dare to do that, right? Which I love, right? Which I love. So why is it, and you mentioned it before, that some things can't be said other than in poetry or song, or something more artistic than just flat read, right? So you were trying to articulate the more difficult things. So that's why
right.
poetry. When we read them, one of the reasons I carry the book around is because any poetic paragraph, like any poetry, has multiple meanings and multiple layers. I have to read it multiple times so I can get at least more than one of the meanings, even if I don't get all of the meanings. So talk about what it's like to write in those realms at the same time.
Well, as bizarre as it may seem, I don't write anything that my name is on. I write what I hear. And the words come so easily that sometimes it's unsettling. So I know I'm not doing it. I'm not sitting down and going, oh, what should go on this page? I often wake up with a stream of consciousness that I know is chapter 2, belongs to chapter 2. And I run over to my computer and I begin to talk with it and write down. And it's that exchange with spirit that allows me to point to that which I cannot prove. So is teaching confined to only what you can put to a test? And whose test is going to prove that it's true and will remain true for all time? So if you don't have any of that, and I don't believe we do, I believe we have temporal knowledge, we have occasional peaks of wisdom, and I think we've shut out all of the indigenous wisdom that might get us to where we're trying to go quicker. So I really, poetry is a way of pointing at something I really can't show you.
Oh my God, yeah.
It's, people have said to me, well, the words crisis and contemplation don't go together. Maybe not. But that's only if you think of crisis and contemplation as solitary practices. Mm-hmm. As an African American, I know that the entry into contemplative places is through the group, the community. I've seen it too many times. Mm-hmm. I looked for it academically and finally found a quote from William Johnston in the book Mystical Theology, where he says, in the upper room, the spirit descends on the group. Not a solitary monk, not an anchorite, not a person just praying, but a group. And the effect of that is seemingly drunken disciples, chaos, noise. worship, none of the things we expect out of contemplation. So that was my academic anchor. There is a scriptural reference that talks about contemplation in a group context. And then in a Black church, I saw it happen. And there was no denying, I'd seen it all my life, but never in the particularity where 7,000 people entered at the same time. I was in Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church, Memphis, Tennessee, and they started singing the song, "Oh Jesus," which I talk about in Joy Unspeakable. And 7,000 people go into the hush harbor together and return together. So once you've seen that, you know that groups can experience crisis together. And more than that, that contemplation isn't a purposeful or intentional practice. You fall into it. It's a breaking, it's a rupture. It's something completely different than I am on my prayer mat. And I saw that in the slave ships. I saw that in the Holocaust, I saw that in the marches of Native Americans from their homelands to Oklahoma, groups of people shattered all at the same time and experiencing rupture, disorder, and chaos.
I think our students, if we can see it, have those moments and have those experiences in our classrooms, or at least in their seminary experiences. And I think they go unattended to.
They do, but there is an openness that you must approach all of these matters that, if you don't have, can kind of be catastrophic. I mean, I remember being in a classroom and having a young male Anglo student say to the African teacher and I that his father had passed, they'd had a bad relationship, and that he wanted to contact him. At the time, the African professor was teaching about spirits walking through water, and that how in Cameroon, they would begin the drumming and the spirits would travel from the site of their village after the celebrations to the other land, but they'd go through water. And the drums in each village would help them passing. And so this young man said, "Oh, okay, well, I'll just put water at the end of my bed tonight." And both the African professor said, "Oh,
No."
But we tried to be reserved because we didn't want to look crazy. We said, that's not a good idea because, you have to be very respectful of other people's beliefs because they may be true. And you're talking to a man who's experienced it and tells you it's true. And he was arrogant and he said, well, that's my problem. And he walked away. Well, the next class, he came in ashen, shaken. The experience that happened the night after the class, and he was still shaken. He had placed the water at the end of his bed, a deep bowl. His father had come through in what he thought was a dream. He awakened, and his father was still sitting there. He freaked completely out. He dropped the class. He dropped out of seminary. See, that's not the outcome. That's because he had approached seminary as vocation and not as also initiation into a ritual that would prepare you to be an intermediary between this world and other worlds.
So I think the roles that we play as teachers is as intermediary. And sometimes the roles are this realm and other realms. And sometimes they are different peoples and different ecologies in this realm.
Absolutely.
Right. So you play just very quickly with, and I went in the book, and I've been aching to ask you this question. You use the words as and I'm taking them as metaphors for teaching, right? So we have these metaphors for teaching, right? Good teachers are when you are like, similes and metaphors. You're a tree, you're a gardener, you're, and all right, nothing wrong with any of those, all right. You talk about good teaching is as being a dreamer, a conjurer, a time traveler, or a pilgrim with our students.
Yes.
I think that list is remarkable and challenges us in very new ways about who we are with our students and for our students, to be dreamers, conjurers, time travelers, and pilgrims.
Yes.
Help us with those.
To determine, I mean, at one phase in your teaching life, you might inhabit each of those roles, or it might just be one that you go into depth and lead people and learn yourself and come back with more knowledge. The first step is to let go of what you believe about what the outcomes of your teaching will be.
Mhm.
It's all right for you to create the syllabus, but that doesn't tell you where you're going. That tells you what you think you want them to read. And you don't know what they're going to get out of that reading or where it's going to take them. So if you're a shaman, if you're a teacher and you are more shamanistic about it, you create the outline for spirit to stir things up. And if you feel safe and not afraid, that's when real learning takes place. And it's only seldom that it happens. You've taught where when those students left the classroom, something had happened you couldn't put your finger on, but you had touched places in them you didn't know was going to happen when the class started. Yeah.
One of the ways I saw it repeatedly in my classroom is, and I say this in the reverence that I think it happened, students would cry in my classes all the time. So these tears would be tears of sadness, tears of redemption, tears of joy. But everybody knows, just like baseball, there's no crying in higher education. Right? So I was unprepared for a long time for I'm like, what are the people crying about? And then I learned, right, not to become frantic when people were crying, to have the tissues at the ready, and even not to ask them why they were crying.
Right. Because the tears are as much a ritual as anything else. I mean, one of the things I talk about is, navigating this moment where there's rupture and you fall into unknowing together, is that you let go. Mm-hmm. Americans don't let go of anything. And we get storage units to hold on to whatever else we should have let go.
When we're beyond our capacity, we get another place to move to capacity. Mm-hmm.
But see, that's because they've been taught that letting go is giving up. Yeah. And they are not the same thing. When we let go, we recognize maybe we've been a little bit arrogant about what we think about the planet and the ways in which its spiritual interiority, affects us, our myths. And once you start to let go, you have a possibility of receiving what you need in the dark nights of the soul that we all inevitably have.
So the viral pandemic, right? The race pandemic that has been with us, is a moment to let go if we just would.
Right. There's no storage space big enough to hold all that.
No.
So you got to let go. I mean, here is a poetic approach to what happens when you do let go. And this is what we're afraid of. And I call it the collective free fall. It happens so slowly. It happens so suddenly. It's safe, and then it's not. When it happens, we're certain about everything. And then the fall strips us of knowing and doing and leaves us with being. Together we fall, sweating, shattered, and gulping the darkness.
There's a way that you call teaching to what it is, and that is a sacred experience. When for so many of us, the experience has been reduced to the mundane, the bastardization of intellect, the impotence of white supremacy, right? And you're calling us out of those illusions and back to its sacredness.
Right. To a oneness that we have carefully avoided. I mean, we are one. And so if one group is traumatized, all of us are traumatized at one level or another.
Right.
I mean, the George Floyd incident was trauma to all. And then when there was a purported resolution with the conviction of Derek Chauvin, it wasn't a point of celebration because the trauma was too deep for those who had not been punished, for those whose loss of life was not recognized. When there's that much trauma, resolution doesn't come easily unless we deconstruct these scaffolds of separation. It's one human race, one. God says God is one. So these places like Minneapolis, where the deaths continued, where I lived, and was shocked by a oneness I'd not seen before. I'd lived in the South most of my life, grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, but worked in the South. And I remember during the Black Lives Matter protest, when they shut down the Mall of America, there are not that many Black people living in Minnesota. It's cold. It's a lovely place.
Like the cold.
But you have no idea how cold it is. And so, yes, there are Black communities, but not in the numbers, where anything could really get done. And I remember watching that protest where white Minnesotans filled every tier shouting Black Lives Matter. And it brought me to tears. I was like, we are one. And there was a realization of that there, but not enough for the society to change and the enforcers of the rule of law to be swept up into that.
But it still happened, right? It still was.
It was, and that could not have happened in the places I had lived.
You also talk in the book about, and it is both vivid and nuanced, and I'm not going to get it right. So help me. You talk in the book about how BIPOC people, I'm going to use my language, need to take their eyes off of white supremacy and move into an understanding that because we're all the same, spending so much attention fighting, pushing back against those who call us inhuman, just stop doing that because you're human and move on. It's what I hear you saying. Not right.
But there was no adequate way to say what I heard and felt. So that's a very flawed way of writing what I was trying to get to. Mm-hmm. It's not all of us. We can't take our eyes off of white supremacy or we'll be annihilated. Mm-hmm. And that's just true. But each of us is called to a different thing. I mean, if you're dependent on scripture, look at scripture, no prophet is the same. Micah's not doing what Jeremiah is doing. Jeremiah is not doing what Isaiah is doing. They're prophetic proclaimers, but they have a lane and they stay in their lane. Some of us are supposed to fight white supremacy with every peaceful tool that we have. Others of us are supposed to restore our health, live, breathe, help other people to live and breathe. We are a multifaceted community. We're not one people. We came from all over the continent of Africa and other places. And so know what you're here for and do that. I mean, that's just another way of stating what Thurman says. Who are you really? Be authentic, do what you're supposed to do, and the world will be a better place. So my task is to write clearly and as bluntly as I can about what is and what is not from my perspective and what the Spirit is giving me. So others have to fight in other battles.
Moving toward authenticity, first of all, I think takes a lifetime to get into ourselves, to know how to use the tools that we have been given.
Right.
And it doesn't have a lot of payoff. It doesn't, you know what I mean? It gets you into trouble.
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 Good trouble. You're not going to have any real peace in this life if you avoid good trouble. Because you were brought here for that, for such a time as this. So trying to live a life without any ripples, you're going to get some ripples. Whether that's family or divorce or death or disease, you're going to have trouble. Jesus said it. I have no reason to doubt him. In this life, you're going to have some trouble. So if you are in discernment about how that trouble can advance the well-being of your community, then you can stand as an example for another generation seeking to know what it is supposed to do. It was very clear in Minnesota as we stood outside of the police station of having a worship service as a protest, basically, that they said to people of my generation, you can let go. We were a long time coming. We took too long. They blamed us a little. They said, y'all got comfortable, started buying ranch houses and
small cars, ranch houses and small cars.
And we didn't know what that meant in the struggle. But we're here now. And we see you and thank you. Let go of the stick, the relay stick. Let us have it. Whether we succeed or fail does not reflect upon the efforts you've made in your life. And my husband turned to me and said, did you hear that? Like,
now can we go fishing? Now can you? Yeah.
So it's a generational thing, but we don't really raise our children to prepare for that moment. And if we don't do it at home, the schools will not. We're not preparing them for such a time as this moment.
Not only don't we prepare them, we don't have, it's not in their imaginations that this moment has such a profound reality to their lack of survival, not their death, but their lack of survival. I mean, there's something churning in the waters now that's so insidious that we're unprepared.
We're unprepared, but also we create worlds that are fake. Our consumer-based habits are not sustainable, and yet we pretend that that's a real thing, that it's something to do to get up and go shopping. Yet We know by the cyclical nature of trouble that that will not give our children sustenance and will not prepare our graduate students to take on leadership. I mean, nothing is normal, and we better understand that. And it's not going to go back to normal.
Nope.
And the people who are saying after the pandemic, everything will be fine, are weaving lies and delusions to suck us all back in. I'm not going back in, because before the pandemic, systemic racism, policing of minorities, economic systems, all of that, planetary disturbances were being ignored. And we agreed that those things needed to be attended to, but we just didn't have enough time to do it. The pandemic gave us time.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized that we weren't equipped to handle any of the things that confronted us. So should we go back to normal? And what is normal anyway?
We can't access it. It's gone. So we can wish for it, we can hope for it, we can even try to reconstruct it. It's gone. Right. So the sooner we recognize that and raise our awareness about that, the better. Right. My last question, help us with Barbara, we're afraid.
Yeah, we're all afraid.
We're afraid.
Yeah. And I can't pretend that I'm not afraid. I just have so many options for wisdom and support from this realm, other realms, that it abates the terror-inducing panic that immobilizes. It's all right to be afraid, but if you're afraid to the point of not being able to accomplish what you're here for, now that's a problem. I mean, my idea of what healing looks like after these kinds of crises is a recognition that we're not all right, that we have been wounded, that those wounds have left toxins within that need cleansing, that we are reliant upon a multifaceted community with gifts, so we don't have to have everything ourselves. I'd be more afraid if I had to depend just on me. But I don't. I have a community here and in the life after life to support and shore up where I am on my lead, what they call your leaning side. Someone will lift you. Someone will share with you. Someone will keep you afloat. So I say in the book, I talk about revival of culture and ritual, memory and story, and then viewing trauma through the lens of joy. Yeah. So that doesn't mean we all have to go off and start dancing and singing, but we have to keep in mind that there's something other than the battle. And also that we have to use unconventional tools for that battle. What does Chronicles say? You send the choir out ahead of the warriors and sing them to pieces. So some of us need to be creating some of those rituals and some of those counterintuitive, because unfortunately, Christianity doesn't talk about revenge so much. My little person would like to get you back. You hit me, I hit you back. Even in my most contemplative moment, I'm looking at you cross-eyed. But what Christianity says is we want to redeem everything, that there's an enemy within you. So how are you going to point a finger at an enemy without? That we're all broken, that we all need healing. And that when it's all over, the best outcome is that we are all healed.
That's the vision, right? That's what keeps us getting up and going.
That's what keeps
not
us.
Trying to decide which ones are going, which ones aren't going to go. The
Although
vision is,
that is a
we,
delightful kind of practice.
but we're
for
not
some.
going to stop short there. Time consuming, but we're not going to stop short there. We all go.
Yeah. Yeah. And it has made me more reflective about the ways in which I can be an enemy in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think I'm not, because I don't do the things that the people I call enemies do.
Mm-hmm.
But there are ways in which I am not aligned with spirit sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I have to recognize that. Otherwise, I cannot show compassion for those who have harmed.
Or be courageous then, right? Your
Or
courage
be.
is used up then with the vengeance.
That's
right?
right.
Don't spend your
That's right.
courage on vengeance. Spend your
That's
courage
right.
on more generative things.
I was talking about Bell Hooks the other day, and she was talking about a time period where she met Thich Nhat Hanh, and she said to him, she'd just gotten divorced, nothing was going right. She said, I was so angry. Mm-hmm. And she said, I wanted to say, oh, I love your work, I love your books. And I said, I'm so angry. Mm-hmm. She said, without context, without anything. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, fine, keep your anger. Use it as compost. Use it as incentive and fire within.
So we don't real. Don't say it's not real. It's real.
Don't worry. It's real.
But don't give it more power than it needs to have.
If you acknowledge it, it remains limited to the space it's in. If you don't acknowledge it, it goes subliminal and consumes you.
So that's when students would get angry in classrooms, I would welcome their anger. I would try to tell them, don't be angry at me. But the ideas that we are exploring, right, which I know I'm a catalyst of, are angering idea, you know, that the notions of dehumanization, the notion that one human being would dare lord over another human being is anger creating.
Yes, yes. Or that you've been told all your life that you're superior.
Yeah. And then you discover that that's a lie too. That's not good news for a lot of people.
That is not. And they want others not to hurt, but they don't want to lose their ranking.
Mm-hmm. And the privileges that come with the lie.
And the privileges that come with the lie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's an interesting section in the book about white supremacy is like a crazed uncle that Anglos keep in the attic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to let him out because he knows all the secrets.
I love that.
And
metaphor.
They don't want to keep him there because he moans and makes noises at the most
inopportune times.
Right. So, yeah, we are in a struggle, and we wrestle not against flesh and blood, against powers and principalities.
Dr. Barbara Holmes, thank you for your inspiration and your examples. Even your confessional spirit to talk about the things that you're still working on, right, in retirement is also inspiring, right? And the courage to even say those kind of things to us here today. So thank you for your legacy, and I'll talk to you soon. That's the best part, right? I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Appreciate it.
To our viewers and listeners, this video, as well as an audio component, will be archived on the Wabash Center website. Please use this video and audio with your students and faculty as a resource. Many thanks to my team, Rachel and Paul, who make all of our digital resources possible. And note that the music which frames this show and all of our shows are the original compositions of Paul Myrie. The Wabash Center is exclusively funded by Lilly Endowment Incorporated. And we are out.